Welcome back, you lucky listeners, to a new episode of NH Unscripted. We ain't too proud to beg. I'm your Temptations-like host, Ray Dudley. We are coming to you from the Taj Mahal-like digs of the WKXL studios in Concord. My God, it's cavernous in here. You know the routine. I got my Nehru jacket on, my bell-bottom pants, my platform shoes. We are trucking, baby. Kick back in those water beds, fire up the lava lamps, and hit the incense, because we got another gorgeous barn burner for you. All right. Get out your Sony Walkmans, who knows what the plural of that is. Anyway, transistor radios. Break those out instead. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM. Those are Concord-based. 101.9 FM for the beautiful souls in Manchester. We love you folks down there. NHTalkRadio.com is our URL, and there's a lot going on out there. I'll tell you about that later. Right now, I would normally be thanking my sponsor, which is Shaheen Gordon, the law offices of Shaheen Gordon. They are all around this state, but just so happens to be Shaheen Gordon Friday. And in the house with me today is Jared O'Connor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I should have said attorney Jared O'Connor.
Oh, not necessary.
Well, thanks. We're on that first name basis already. Thanks. Sir, what segment of law do you handle for Shaheen Gordon?
So I've been practicing workers' compensation law for about 20 years now.
Boring.
Yeah, sure.
I happen to know for a fact it's not, because we had some pre-show chatting. Why don't we start off by give us the your background and why you even chose workman's comp. I can't imagine.
Sure. Well, I sort of fell into it. I mean, my own personal background is after college, I didn't go straight to law school. I was a freelance journalist for a little while.
Weren't you a chef at one time, too?
Kind of. Not a very good one. Not a very good one, which is why I left that. But law school is something I always thought about doing, and I eventually decided in my late 20s to go. And then after law school, I got a job in Nashua, at a small law firm, doing general practice, a little bit of everything that comes in the door. And when you're a brand new lawyer, you just do what you're told.
I'm thinking Better Call Saul. It comes to mind for me.
It wasn't dissimilar from that. I didn't do a lot of criminal work, but a little bit of everything else.
Okay.
And my partner at the time, one of the partners of the firm, had given me a couple of workers' comp cases to work on. And I just found that I really, really enjoyed it. It's fast-paced work. You can get in and help people quickly, and the law is a lot more interesting than you might imagine, or at least I found it that way.
You are correct in that statement.
So I just quickly gravitated toward it and started taking more and more of those cases, and it eventually became the sole focus of my practice. And like I said, it's really all I've been doing now for about 20 years.
20 years?
Yeah.
You said you found it kind of fascinating or fun. Why? What would possibly be novel or intriguing about workman's comp?
So if you don't mind, I'll give you a little bit of the history.
Fire away.
So it is interesting. So the background of workers' compensation is it's a very unique area of practice. It's kind of a subset of personal injury law because it deals with injuries, obviously. But it's very distinct from it in a couple of ways. So the concept of workers' compensation first really started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was a reaction to the problems created by the Industrial Revolution, which sounds strange, but bear with me for a minute. So the idea here is that it used to be the case in the 18th century that people would work by, you're working on fields and you're tinkering with your own you're manufacturing trinkets and selling them to your neighbors. But then after the Industrial Revolution started, people began doing jobs where they would sell their labor to employers in large factories. This is like a new thing for the economy.
Yep.
And so it really began in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts in particular with all of these mill buildings that are all along the Merrimack River and down into Lowell, like the shoe factories of Lowell.
Yes.
And so if you think about what that would have been like to work in those factories at the time, they were incredibly dangerous. You've got sawmills going, and people are working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. It's 1870.
Right next to the 5-year-olds.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly the point. That's exactly right. So there's no such thing as child labor laws.
Right.
There's no such thing as health insurance or OSHA. And so people would get horrifically injured in some of these sawmills. They'd be losing limbs. And so their remedy at the time, what they would have to do is sue their employer to get any kind of benefits or any kind of coverage. So they would bring a regular personal injury lawsuit against their employer. And the way regular personal injury works is you got to show your employer had a duty to you and that they breached that duty, and now you have all these damages, which is a legally complex way to go about bringing.
And I would imagine expensive. I mean, those people working in the mills didn't have like big bucks.
Well, that's the other problem, is that here you are, you're a worker in a sawmill, you've just lost your arm.
Yeah.
It's 1896 and there's no health insurance. You have to bring this lawsuit and wait 2-3 years to get in front of a jury.
Oh my God.
In the meantime, how are you paying the bills? How are you supporting your family? And so it was a mess for injured workers. You have this army of maimed people with no recourse other than to sue their employer.
Wow.
And most of the time, those cases wouldn't go anywhere because the judges would rule that you accepted the risk when you took the job.
Really?
Yeah. And so for the most part, people weren't getting any sort of coverage. Very occasionally, someone would be able to get through and get a successful verdict and get massive damages. They would get all of their benefits paid, all of the lost future earnings, all of their pain and suffering.
Back pay and all that.
And all that.
Yeah.
And you could wipe out an employer with a massive damage award like that. So that was the sort of state of play at the turn of the century. And around this time, you also have the beginnings of the labor movement, like back in 1911. Have you ever heard of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire?
No.
No? It was a famous fire. We actually just celebrated, quote unquote, the anniversary of it.
Good term.
About 2-3 weeks ago. It happened back in 1911. It was a shirtwaist factory in New York where they employed primarily women and girls to sew and they were sewing shirts.
Yep.
And this was on the 6th or 7th floor of a factory in New York. And the employer had boarded up all the exits.
I do recall this.
Yeah, to keep people from leaving.
Yeah.
And a fire broke out and killed over 120, mostly women and girls. And that is going on at the same time that, again, the labor movement is getting off the ground and people are agitating for workers' rights and limited hours, trying to get something like the work week established.
My goodness.
And so in the mix of all of this ferment, the idea of workers' comp started. And the idea was, we will take away your right to sue your employer. And so we'll put an end to all of these lawsuits. And instead, right, well, you're right to make that face. So he's raising his eyebrow. You're right to make that face because you have the right under the 7th Amendment to the Constitution to bring suit for your injuries and to have a jury trial.
That's very interesting.
So it's tricky whether this was even going to be legal, but they proposed this idea that we're going to put a stop to the lawsuits. We will just have employers all pay into a big insurance pool. And instead of being able to sue your employer, if you're injured on the job, then you will get coverage through this insurance system.
Got you.
So the big trade-off, what they call the grand bargain of the early 1900s, was this trade-off where we take away your right to sue, but in exchange, you get this easier to qualify for set of benefits. And now you no longer have to prove that there's fault or that your employer did anything wrong. Fault doesn't enter into it any longer. Workers' comp's a no-fault system. So all that really matters is that you're on the job and you're injured because of some risk of your employment. Could be your fault. Doesn't matter. Fault doesn't enter into it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so it's easier to qualify for the benefits. But by the same token, the benefits are less. So you don't get the big damage awards that you get in a personal injury case. You don't get pain and suffering. But what you do get is medical coverage, potentially for life, for the injury that you sustained, and weekly benefits to help you keep the lights on and put food on the table while you're recovering from your injury.
So, oh man, that is fascinating. I was listening this morning. I'm going to screw this up, but some federal program that was for workers or something. And what was happening, and all the money was going into the federal pot. And what was happening was they were giving out a lot of money. It might have been for medical malpractice or something, right? And so you could sue doctors or pharmacies or whatever. And so what was happening was they were settling a lot of these cases. Well, the pool was getting lower and lower. So they just coincidentally started, the funnel was getting smaller and smaller as to what you could qualify for. They would sort of sift through.
Right.
All right. Hang on. I opened a can of worms. I know I did. You are listening to NH Unscripted, where kicks just keep getting harder to find. I am your Paul Revere and the Raiders-like host, Ray Dudley. We are coming to you from the YMCA-like digs of the WKXL studios in Concord. I can smell the pool chlorine from here. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, and 101.9 FM for the beautiful souls of Manchester. Jared O'Connor is in the house. We're talking workman's comp. I know he can make it funny. It's good. You'll like it. Listening to NH Unscripted. Just can't help believing. Yeah, baby, I'm your BJ Thomas-like host, Ray Dudley. Yeah, coming to you from the Gong Show-like digs of the WKXL studios. And no, I am not the unknown comic. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM. That's Concord-based, 101.9 FM for the beautiful souls in Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com is the URL. Attorney Jared O'Connor is in the house, and he has stories, baby, I'll tell you. So the insurance companies, did they kind of like this? Did they not like that? I mean, no insurance company loves giving out money. Talk to the folks in California.
Yeah.
But so were they happy to come on board with this?
I can't speak for the insurance companies, obviously. They're always on the other side of my cases. But, I think, the insurance companies were happy to get involved in that. Like any insurance company, they collect premiums and then they pay out on claims when they have to. And so, the idea of workers' comp, when it was first passed, they were able to, it's a brand new line of business for them. So the same way that you have car insurance or liability insurance, property insurance, workers' comp insurance is just a new line of business. So they step into the breach. Employers are required to have it, or else they have to be self-insured. There are some employers that just pay out themselves, but most of them will buy an insurance policy the same way that you have auto insurance.
So how has that changed over the years? Has it been refined? Have the laws changed about it to kind of make it better?
The laws are always in flux, sort of changing at the margins, but the basic structure of how comp works has been effectively the same since about 1911. Things expand and contract as social mores change. Like, for example, recently there's been a push, at least in New Hampshire, which is really what I know about the most. Yeah. There's been a push in New Hampshire to expand the protections of what comp covers and to change, in particular, I've been involved with the governor's PTSD commission for first responders. And so mental injuries are not treated any differently than physical injuries under workers' comp.
Okay.
Meaning, for example, let's say you're a teacher and you're involved in a school shooting.
Oh, yeah.
You don't get hit, you don't get physically injured, but you might develop PTSD from something like that. That counts as a workers' comp injury. You're exposed to a risk on the job. It's not a risk that's very common for a teacher, but it can happen, and it happens in the context of your workplace. You get PTSD, that's a workers' comp case. And that's been the law forever, essentially. What the Governor's Commission recently was put in place back in 2019 was intended to investigate, in particular, PTSD in first responders.
Okay.
Meaning police, fire, corrections officers, 911 dispatchers, EMTs, people that are more routinely exposed to trauma on the job. I mean, you can imagine the kind of stuff these guys see.
I can only imagine.
So they are, if anything, much more likely to develop PTSD because of the routine horrors they're exposed to.
Yeah.
And what the commission was charged with investigating was whether there should be a presumption in the law, meaning when these people develop PTSD, we're going to assume it's work-related and not make you have to come and prove that this happened on the job. We're going to assume that you got it from the job and shift the burden to the insurance company to prove otherwise. And that law actually passed in New Hampshire 3 years ago now, January.
Someone used to have to prove that it was
Oh, sure. That's standard. As the claimant, as the injured worker, the burden of proof is always on you as the injured worker to show that the injury happened on the job and that your condition is related. Now, in a lot of cases, that's not an issue. If somebody falls off a ladder and breaks their hip, the insurance company's not going to fight about that. They understand that this is work-related. But for things that are a little more complex, or like cumulative trauma injuries,
psychological or mental issues,
that would you
even? I mean, would you have to have a note from your counselor or psychologist or something? I mean,
oftentimes, yeah. I mean, it's a mix of showing that you didn't have any of these problems prior to the event, and now you do, and it's because of your exposure on the job, or frankly, what you see more often, and particularly with first responders, because a lot of cops, a lot of firefighters, they're ex-military. You know, after they have served their term in Fallujah, they come back and they become firefighters. They become police officers. And so they may have a history where they were exposed to trauma outside the job, and they may well have some residual PTSD from those experiences. But it doesn't get in the way of them being able to do their job. They do their job effectively for years. But the repeated trauma of the things they see over years of responding to calls and doing the things they do every day as part of their job can exacerbate their pre-existing condition, make it worse. And so that kind of thing absolutely qualifies as a work injury.
Even though it was previous to their job.
Yep. If you have an injury or a condition that's made worse by your work activity, then that counts. And it's the same for physical injuries. I mean, if you have pre-existing osteoarthritis. You're a 48-year-old and you decide you're going to take a job in a factory, and that factory involves you standing on concrete all day and hauling heavy items around. You might exacerbate your pre-existing knee problem, and now all of a sudden you need a knee replacement way earlier than you otherwise would have.
Yeah.
That counts as work-related. The aggravation was caused by work. That's now the insurance carrier's responsibility.
So that falls on the workman's comp?
Absolutely.
I would have just thought it'd be a health issue or...
Nope. If you can show, and again, the burden is always on the injured worker to show it, but if you can show that the work activity made you worse than you otherwise would have been, if you had just had a desk job for 10 years, you wouldn't have needed that knee replacement. But because of the physical nature of your job that accelerated your pre-existing condition, that's enough.
Oh man, I guess it is a fascinating
I like to think so. But what the PTSD Commission did was to change the presumption. So you as an injured worker or as an injured first responder no longer have to prove it. All you have to show is that you've been diagnosed with PTSD. It's assumed now that it's work-related, and the burden is on the insurance company to prove otherwise. So they still have an opportunity to do that. They can go to a hearing at the Labor Department. They can bring up evidence to show that, well, actually, no, it's not so much work, it's something else. And that's the kind of fight that you end up having.
See, I have a relative who went out on workman's comp, got injured, and then like years later, he still had like a private detective following him around to make sure that, I don't know even know how that worked. He said it was fascinating because he knew the guy, and he'd be like out at the shopping mall or something, see the guy parked there, watching to see whether he still limped or whatever,
Yeah, that absolutely can happen because once you have a established workers' comp injury that the insurance company has to pay for, they have to pay for that injury, at least medically, forever, as long as the treatment is still related. So, yes, sometimes with longer cases, if there's some question in the medical records about whether the treatment is still related, is this person really still having the limp? Do they still need physical therapy? If there's some question about that, then, the insurance company can put a PI on you. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen.
Wow. And, they put him through the mill because even though he was getting it, they were trying to fight it, and so he had to go through doctor after doctor. They were testing his joints and stuff, and over and over and over. It took like 4 or 5 years before they finally said, "Okay, we're just going to let this go." And
we'll cover it.
Yeah.
That can happen.
How gracious of them.
It definitely the gamut ranges from very obvious injuries where there's no fight, often for years, because it's so clear that the injury happened and that the treatment's related. But there are plenty of other cases where even if it's accepted right at the beginning and everything is going fine for a year or 3, at some point there can develop a dispute about whether the ongoing treatment's still related. Is this person still disabled or not? Might they be able to work? Could they do something else? How much money would they make doing that job? You can have those kinds of fights. So
I would imagine, and maybe, I don't know where you were at the point, but 9/11 must have been I mean, I know it's New York, but
Right.
I can't even imagine.
Those were every firefighter that was involved in that.
I would imagine.
Those were all workers' compensation cases. And Congress set up a special fund. I don't know a ton about this, but I'm aware that Congress set up a special fund specifically to compensate firefighters for the cancers that they later developed because of the exposure to all the asbestos and everything that they were exposed to when the buildings fell. Wow. And so, and similarly, New Hampshire has been much more aggressive in the last few years about expanding its own cancer presumption, because we have that as well here in the state.
In what way? I don't ever figure New Hampshire for cancer.
Yeah, so again, this applies only to firefighters.
Okay.
And the law was actually passed back in the late 80s. So they introduced, just like with PTSD, which they recently did, they introduced a presumption that if you are a firefighter and you've developed cancer, that it's presumed work-related. Now, again, the city or the municipality can try to prove otherwise. That was quickly ruled an unconstitutional, unfunded mandate. It wasn't funded. So it was it lay fallow for a while, and nothing happened with the law for a long time. But then the legislature funded it back in 2018. And so very recently, there's been a lot more activity about expanding that presumption.
Man, hang on. We got to put a pin in it right there. I love cliffhangers. You are listening to NH Unscripted, where here comes that rainy day feeling again. I am your fortunes-like host, Ray Dudley, coming to you from the dating game-like digs of the WKXL studios in Concord. 101.9 FM for the souls in Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com is our URL. Jared O'Connor has some fascinating info on workman's comp. We're going to peel right through it all. Be right back. Welcome back to NH Unscripted, where we are your 19th Nervous Breakdown, baby. I am your Rolling Stones-like host, Ray Dudley. We are coming to you from the not overly ostentatious digs of the WKXL studios in Concord. It's a little nod to Norm Nathan from BZ years ago. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord. NHTalkRadio.com is our URL. Attorney Jared O'Connor is in the house, and we're talking workman's comp. Wake up. No, hang on. I promise it gets better. Hang on. Jared, I had been speaking to Bill Christie and Jim Rosenberg, all attorneys over there. And one of the things that I was talking to them about was how New Hampshire is kind of in the middle of this horseshoe where Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts, Connecticut and Rhode Island all have laws. Well, marijuana is legal for most part there. And so New Hampshire sits there, and they were telling me stories about, people coming through, and they get pulled over. They're on a ski trip heading up north, and they get pulled over, but we don't. It's not legal here.
Right.
So, but you have a special take on this.
I do. So it's true that it's not legal for recreational purposes, but it was made legal for medicinal purposes back in 2016.
Okay.
So New Hampshire authorized medical marijuana, or what they call therapeutic cannabis, same thing. So they authorized that. But when that happened, it opened up the door potentially to have workers' compensation claimants, like my clients, have the therapeutic cannabis that they're quote-unquote prescribed by their doctors for their work injury reimbursed or paid for by the insurance carrier. Because again, if you step back, the workers' comp carrier has to pay for all your medical treatment for your work injury, whatever it may be, whether it's surgery, physical therapy, medications, whatever, they're responsible for it, as long as it's related. So I had a client with a pretty serious spine injury that he'd had since the 90s. So this was an old case, but he'd been treating for decades. And he had, gone through pain medications and had some difficulties with those. And ultimately, once New Hampshire authorized therapeutic cannabis, his doctor recommended that he try medical marijuana. So he did. And then he came to me and said, well, listen, my doctor's telling me I should be doing this for the pain caused by my work injury. They've been covering all my medications for the last 2 decades. Are they going to cover this? And I said, well, probably not, but let's find out. Well, let's find out. And so we began the process of challenging that. So we essentially took, $160 receipt for what he got from the local, the alternative treatment center, they call it, sent that into the carrier and said, we believe this is related, please reimburse. And the answer was no. So then we brought a case to the New Hampshire Labor Department and argued that it was related and that they had to cover it. Now, this case took about 6 years to fully
Seriously?
litigate. Yeah. So the issue was ultimately, it began with a challenge under state law.
Okay.
Because, again, New Hampshire had authorized it for medical marijuana. They authorized it for medicinal purposes. But there was something in the state law that said that nothing in this law will be construed to require a health insurance company to pay for it. So first, the insurance company denied it on that ground, saying, well, this says we don't have to pay. And so we had to go up to the Supreme Court and establish you're not a health insurance company. And just because it says nothing in the medical marijuana law shall be construed to require it, that's not the same thing as saying you're prohibited from paying for it. So the court agreed with that, but then they continued to fight basically on federal law grounds. So here's the problem. Yes, New Hampshire authorizes it for medical purposes. So it's legal under state law to be in possession of marijuana. However, marijuana is still illegal under federal law. And this is true because it's federal law. It's true across the country. If you're in possession of any amount of marijuana, you are violating federal law.
Wait, how? Have they never heard of Colorado?
They may have heard of it, but they don't seem to care. It doesn't seem to matter.
How does that work? How?
It's a conflict. It's this
no
conflict.
Kidding.
Yeah, it's a problem, and it's been a problem for a while. So under federal law, marijuana is treated as what they call a Schedule I drug. So all major controlled substances and drugs are regulated by Congress and the FDA, and there's a schedule in the law where they set out and describe and classify each individual drug. So things like gabapentin or OxyContin or other drugs that are dangerous but useful are considered Schedule II.
Okay.
So most drugs that are prescribed and that you get at CVS or Walgreens, that's a Schedule II drug. Schedule IV might be like your aspirin over-the-counter stuff.
Okay.
Schedule I is what Congress has deemed drugs that have
in their wisdom,
such as it is, that they have no medicinal value. So that's things like your heroin and your cocaine and your LSD and marijuana.
Have they never heard of MK Ultra? These are the people who have. Okay,
they started.
Don't get me started, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Didn't they authorize MK Ultra? But yeah, so that's where the law stands. That's where it's been forever. So with Schedule I drugs, again, just like heroin, if you're in possession of any of it, you're violating federal law. And so it was a clever argument by the insurance company because what they were saying was, listen, we know that we're not possessing the marijuana, your client is.
Yeah.
But if he purchases it and uses it perfectly validly under state law, he's fully authorized under state law, but if he uses it and we reimburse him, then we, as the insurance company, are aiding and abetting his criminal possession
according to
and
the
criminal
federal
use.
law.
Exactly. So we ourselves, as the insurance company, would be guilty of federal aiding and abetting. So that was their argument. And so we had to take that up to our state Supreme Court and argue that no, and this gets into the criminal weeds a bit, but to be guilty of aiding and abetting, you not only have to know that the crime is being committed, but you have to want the crime to be committed. It's what they call mens rea. I don't know if you ever heard of this. The idea here is under criminal law, like let's say you're driving down the street and you drive past a bank robbery.
Yeah.
And the bank robber comes out, hops in your car, puts a gun to your head and says, get me out of here.
Yeah.
And
happens to me all the time.
Of course. It's New Hampshire. It's very dangerous. So you drive away.
Yeah.
All right. Now, you've just helped this person abscond from the scene.
Yeah.
Now, are you aiding and abetting the crime?
I guess technically,
Technically, physically, you've
not
done
willingly,
something.
I would.
And that's the point. That's the point, is that you're not doing it willingly. Okay. You're under duress. And so you would not be charged and you would not be found criminally liable for aiding and abetting because you had the gun to your head.
Yeah.
The same is essentially true here. At least this was my argument, is that when I bring my client to the Labor Department with this bill for marijuana and say, listen, Labor Department, I want you to find that his use of this drug is reasonable and medically necessary. That's it. And if you find that, in any other circumstance, the insurance company has to pay. That's the test when you're at the Labor Department for any other kind of drug. If it's reasonable and medically necessary, the insurance company's got to cover it. So with the medical marijuana, if the board at the Labor Department agrees that the use is reasonable and medically necessary, then by law, the insurance company has to cover it, just like they cover any other drug. And so their intent in reimbursing my client is not to help him commit a crime. Their intent is to
stay out of jail themselves. Oh, man.
And so their intent to just follow the law and comply with this court order or the board's order is it sort of eliminates the mens rea or the potential that they would be criminally liable.
Wow.
And that's what our state court found. And so not every state court has held that. This same issue has come up state to state. Because workers' comp is it's state specific. Every state has its own workers' comp law, but states handle it slightly differently. It's a lot like family law. You know how you can get divorced in any state in the country, but getting divorced in Texas is a little different than getting divorced in New Hampshire. Yeah. Same thing is true for workers' comp. And so other states have handled this differently, but our state agreed that it is reimbursable. So at this point, if you have a work injury and your doctor
I'm feeling one coming on, by the way.
You look a little sore. Yeah. Yeah, if your doctor authorizes it, then potentially it's reimbursable. You still have to go to the Labor Department and prove it's reasonable and medically necessary. But if you do, then the insurance carrier has to cover it.
So this shadow of the federal government sitting over this, could they, if they really wanted to and just be jackwads, could they federally come to all of these people who are in their state, it's legal, but come after them on a federal level?
In theory, yes. When you get your therapeutic cannabis card from the state of New Hampshire, so what happens is a doctor can't prescribe it because it's a Schedule I drug. So they're not allowed to prescribe it. What happens under New Hampshire law is you have a condition, a qualifying condition under state law, and there's a list of conditions that you can have, including things like PTSD, chronic pain, but there's a list of things you have. Your doctor, we got to pause.
Oh, man, I was like,
all right, we'll come back.
I was so intent on that. Oh, man. Gosh. You are listening. Yes, you're lucky you get out of bed. You know it. You are listening to NH Unscripted. Yeah, I'm kind of your green tambourine, aren't I? Yeah, your lemon pipers like host, Ray Dudley, 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM for the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful souls in Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com is our URL. We are on a fascinating topic. Mr. O'Connor's in here today, and we are chatting it up, baby. We'll be right back because he left us hanging.
Great.
Welcome back to NH Unscripted, where we know you're blinded by the light. I'm your Manfred Man-like host, Ray Dudley, coming to you from the spa-like conditions of the WKXL studios. A little lower there, if you know, a little lower. Yeah, that feels good. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM for the beautiful souls in Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com is our URL, where you can go out there. There is a button where you can click and you can listen live to this show, which happens to air every Wednesday and Friday morning at 9 a.m. Or, hey, you just go out there. There's archives. I hear there's other shows in the studio. I don't know. I only know about this one. But you can go out there 2, 3, 4 a.m. in the morning having your little milk and cookies, and you need somebody close to just warm you up. Yeah, go right out there. NHTalkRadio.com. That's our URL. And before we get too deep, before we clean up this mess, I want to give out the URL for Shaheen Gordon, the law offices of Shaheen Gordon, and their URL. Get out your pencils. I told you, you want to put it on a magnet on your fridge. You want to put it with your legal papers. ShaheenGordon.com. ShaheenGordon.com. Write it down. 603-614-5633. 5560, and they got offices all over the state: Concord, Dover, Manchester, Nashua, Peterborough, and I hear there's one coming up in Keene for all you people way out there in nowhere's land. Yeah. 603-614-5560. Sir.
All right, so I think
Yes.
when last we left our hero, he was trying to get a medical marijuana card.
Yes.
Right? All right. So as I was saying, the doctor can certify that you have one of these conditions. So the law says, of these 6 to 8 conditions, these are what qualify you to get the card.
Yeah.
So the treating physician, they're not prescribing it because they can't. All they're doing is certifying that you have the condition. So with that certification, you send that into the Department of Health and Human Services.
Semantics are everything, are they not?
But it makes,
my goodness.
Makes a difference under federal law.
Okay. Yeah.
So then, as the injured worker, you send your certification up to the Department of Health and Human Services. They send you back the card. And you are then authorized to go to one of the 4 approved alternative treatment centers, and you can get X amount per month, whatever the limit is. But what you were asking about was, can the feds come after you?
Right.
Well, when you get that card
You could be
from
sitting
the
in the
state,
parking lot when you come out of the dispensary.
when you get that card from the state, they are very clear. They send a letter with it that says, please be aware you are violating federal law.
Really? I did
Absolutely.
not know that.
Yeah. They make it very clear. Now the federal government's been very clear as well that they have deprioritized this as an enforcement.
Yeah.
So they've told their local attorneys general not to go after, or the attorneys federally, not to go after people for low-level drug possession in the cases where states have authorized it. So as long as you're in compliance with state law, as just a matter of what they call prosecutorial discretion, they're going to put hands off. They're not going to come after you. If you're violating state law, then you're also violating the feds, and they'll come after you potentially for that. But they're focusing their enforcement in drug-related activities on things like fentanyl, on things like gang activity and that sort of thing. But that doesn't change the fact that
It still is federally.
it's illegal federally.
So what kind of time could you do federally for this then? I mean, how do people that as a deterrent? It's not working, but
That's clearly true. That I don't know, because my area of expertise is comp, not criminal. I learned enough about criminal law to figure that piece of it out and to go and litigate the
You leave
case.
that to Jim.
Leave that to Jim. Leave that to Rosenberg. He knows how long people are going to go away for marijuana possession.
So this is all left up to what, Congress? These 80, 90-year-old people who can barely function in a... Oh, I'm going to get tagged for this one. But they're the ones making the decision that marijuana, which I could have gone to jail for in the 70s looking for a nickel bag or whatever, they're making the decision of whether it's Schedule 1
Correct.
up there with like psilocybin and LSD. And are you kidding me?
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so it's been Schedule 1 now since I think the 20s or 30s. And, in the last 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years, there have been efforts, I think every year, to try to deschedule it, to get it down from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. There just hasn't been enough of a push to actually make it happen. But, the more that states legalize it, and the more that money gets involved, and there's actually a business to be had here, there's some pressure from the business community as well.
You're saying there could be some money involved. So just follow the money trail? Is that what you're saying?
Can you imagine?
No, and I'm shocked.
Yeah.
It's my shock.
But I mean, because it's Schedule 1, it also means that there can't be almost any investigation into the medical benefits of it. So like with any other kind of drug.
What?
So what I mean is the kind of clinical trials that the FDA requires for a drug to hit the market, it has to be a Schedule 2 or less for universities to do research on it, to run clinical trials. Schedule 1 drugs, you can't get that authorization. If you're a local university and you want to see whether there's health benefits to cocaine, the federal government's not going to allow that. And the same is true for marijuana because it's Schedule 1. So you can't do the kinds of testing that would normally be required to figure out, all right, well, you take the drug and there's THC, you distill that. You separate
19
the
strains of the CBD in there, CBD, E, F, G, H. So who's doing all of that then? If this... Okay, I'm stuck here.
Well, there's some kind of special dispensation that was authorized to, I think, a university in Louisiana to do this kind of medical research on marijuana. And I think a drug that came out of that is called Marinol, which is it's THC or CBD derived.
Okay.
And so they can do some preliminary research. But again, it's not anything that can get FDA approval yet because it's not a Schedule 2 or less.
What do you think, personally, are the chances of having it go from Schedule 1 to something less?
I mean, I've been telling my clients for a decade that it's 5 years. I've been telling my clients for a long time that it's probably 4 or 5 years away, and that keeps being 4 or 5 years away. So it seems to make sense. I think everybody recognizes that marijuana is not nearly the danger that heroin or cocaine is. So I think we'll get there eventually.
Jim told me that when he was over in Amsterdam or something, he just happened to find out that it's very common over there.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just putting that out there, Jim. Just saying.
Well, it's increasingly common here too.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, we're surrounded by states that have it even recreationally.
You can go on. They're advertising on TV now for sleep tinctures that have this in it, and you can get it in the mail. Maybe not the full marijuana, but you can go on any web. There's websites out there where people.
I mean, the idea that
someone's pushing the envelope.
The idea that this state in particular wouldn't legalize it, regulate it, tax the hell out of it.
Yes.
And just, we have the infrastructure with the liquor stores
No
as is.
kidding.
That same sort of thing to generate tax revenue alone, you would imagine.
You can get drunk and high in the same parking lot. Not that anyone would.
Nobody would do that. We're not advocating. We're not advocating for that here. But I would imagine the pressure to get tax revenue alone would cause some movement there too.
I'm very surprised for that alone. I mean, Colorado is pulling in billions of dollars.
Right.
If you had 50 states pulling in billions of dollars, how does the federal end of it not see that and want a piece? They're like the mafia. They want a piece of everything, right?
Yeah. They're a little busy now, I think, but I think they will get to the point where this will become something that they'll eventually see the light on.
Wow.
Yeah. But I can't predict how long that's going to be.
No, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Just like always.
So do you spend a lot of time on this kind of thing? Does it eat up? Not eat up. You enjoy it. Taking these cases for PTSD and that type of thing, is it becoming...
The PTSD piece has become a bigger part of my practice recently.
Yeah?
My representation of first responders has expanded a lot in the last 5 years.
You're the go-to guy lately for...
Well, I would like to think so.
Yes, you are.
I've been doing a lot more of it.
In the studio you are.
There you go. No, I've been doing a lot more of it. And since the presumption was passed 4 years ago now, it's become more common. I mean, the problem with PTSD and first responders for a long time was cultural. People don't want to admit that they have the condition, or they don't recognize that that's what it is even. Mm-hmm. That's been a long time issue. And you can imagine there's a certain... there's a certain spirit of corps when you're a police officer or a firefighter. You kind of, you're going to be exposed to these horrors when you take the job and you suck it up and you deal with it. And that's been sort of the mindset for a long time. But now people are starting to recognize that, no, there are consequences to being exposed to these things on the job. And some of the consequences are you can have symptoms of PTSD. And hopefully the idea here with having the law change to make it more accessible for people to get the treatment that they need for it means that they can get in, see someone, and get treated so that it doesn't end up disabling them and ruining their careers.
Jared, I have still so many more questions. Yeah, I'm going to have to get you back. That's fascinating. Well, there you have it. That's the end of that episode. My goodness, you have been listening to NH Unscripted, where, we're over and over and over again. I am your Dave Clark 5 host, Ray Dudley. We are coming to you from the Hollywood Squares-like digs of the WKXL studios in Concord. I like sitting in the center square, the old Pauline Square. 1450 AM, 103.9 FM in Concord, 101.9 FM for the beautiful souls in Manchester. NHTalkRadio.com is the URL. And you know what? Let me give you this tagline, because everyone should know a good lawyer. ShaheenGordon.com. It's their Friday. We're so good. Jared, thank you for being here. I mean that sincerely.
Thanks, Ray. It was fun.
Whew, that's an understatement.